and a Labour MP for 21 years, Barry Gardiner, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, former business secretary in the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, Vince Cable, Camilla Tominey, associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, and the lawyer and former chief prosecutor for North West England, Nazir Afzal. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Remember, at home, you can argue along through the programme using our hashtag on social media. It's BBCQT. Oh, and by the way, we now have our own Instagram account, so do watch out for that. There's nothing we won't do to keep up with the Kardashians. On Question Time, we do our best. David Higgett, let's have your first question, please.
Now that the EU's rejected the Brexit deal, is it time to walk away? The Chequers deal?
Time to walk away, now that the EU has rejected the Chequers plan. Chris Skidmore.
I don't think now is the time. We've had a meeting in Salzburg where none of us know exactly the private conversations that have been had with the Prime Minister and the leaders of the other 27 EU member states. And we have that EU summit on the 17th of October. And it's right, I think, that negotiations do continue. I think we want to look to achieve a deal that will be in the interests of stability and security for businesses across the UK. And I also hope that we can achieve that deal. But so
when Donald Tusk, as President of the Council, says the Chequers plan won't work because it undermines the single market, you think he's just blagging?
Well, I think we've had these sort of psychodramas over the past year and a bit where people sort of said, well, look, the EU's, the exit fee is going to be £100 billion. It ended up being £39 billion for us to pay. We weren't going to then have a final deal on citizens' rights, and actually last November we managed to solve that. So there's still the scope to have a deal, but the Prime Minister's been very clear that we're also working very carefully on preparing for a no-deal exit. The Chancellor's put aside £3 billion in the budget to be able to do that. We've had Dominic Raab set out very clearly in a speech in August about making clear those no-deal preparations.
Are you disappointed by what happened today?
Well, I voted Remain myself. My constituency, Kingswood, similar to Dewsbury, 57% of people voted Leave. And as soon as that result happened, I respected the result. I'm somebody who doesn't believe in having... I think somehow a people's vote, a second referendum, will be absolutely catastrophic for democracy in our country. It's written into legislation now that we're leaving on the 29th of March next year. And we need to make sure that we're prepared to be able to leave.
Were you disappointed by what happened?
So I feel that the Prime Minister's gone out of her way to try and arrange for a deep and special partnership with the EU.
And hasn't got it?
And she hasn't got it.
Did you see Instagram? Have you seen Donald Tusk's Instagram today?
This is the
piece of cake
picking thing. I have. And
a piece of cake and no cherries, he said.
And I think that also, if I'm honest with the audience here and panel, I think if the referendum was if the referendum was rerun tomorrow, I'd probably now vote Leave. I think actually, when I look at how the Prime Minister's been treated, that actually I think we have gone out of our way to try and ensure that we can have that relationship. And we're beginning to diverge from the EU. That actually, when we look at where the EU's going, where Tusk is going, where the EU27's going, we're not part of Schengen, we're not part of the single currency. It wants to follow a separate direction, a political project, and we're not going to be part of that. And I think actually now, looking on 2 years into these negotiations, while I still want to get a deal for the economic security of the United Kingdom, I think that now we're probably better to go it alone.
You're right. So you'd leave because you're miffed by the way we've been treated?
No, not at all. I think it just proves that in terms of us as the UK leaving the European Union, it's not the European Union we signed up to, and it's clear that the leaders of the European Union want to take the project in a very different direction.
Barry Gardiner, do you sympathise with that view?
A no deal would represent a complete failure of the government's negotiating strategy over the past 18 months. Here we are, 18 months on, and this is the deal that Liam Fox and David Davis told us would be the easiest in human history to conclude. And we have a government that is stockpiling medicines. We have a government that is stockpiling food. We have a government that is stockpiling Portaloos, hundreds of Portaloos, to put on the M20 for all the lorry drivers that they think may be
We've heard this said on Question Time many times. I don't want to interrupt you. This we know about. The question was, now that this plan has been rejected today, is it time to walk away?
No, because the negotiations are not concluded yet, and what we need is a government that is able to conclude a deal that is going to, yes, absolutely honour the referendum result. That has to be the case, and like Chris, I voted to remain, but as soon as the referendum had taken place, I respect that result. But it must be one that also honours the need for all of us to have jobs, for the manufacturing supply chain to be respected, so that the just-in-time supply chain is able to be there. It keeps our jobs and economy going.
So what would you add? How would you change Chequers?
Well, look, the Labour Party actually has a very good policy on this, and it's called a new customs union with the EU, which for goods would actually do that. It would respect the just-in-time supply chain. It would mean that we were able to conclude a deal with the European Union that respected the Northern Ireland border, because this is the other big issue that has arisen, not just arisen today, but that has been highlighted today by what they've said in Europe. We need something that is going to respect the Northern Ireland border, but not put a new border in the Irish Sea between Britain and Northern Ireland. And all of these things can be done by the Labour Party's policy of a new customs union with the EU.
Right. Do you agree with that, Vince Cable?
Absolutely not, no. I mean, quite apart from the specifics, I mean, Barry was very critical of us being in a customs union, has now seemed to have changed position, but no, the question we started with was...
That's not the case, actually, Vince, okay, because it was... What I criticised was the relationship that Turkey had with the EU, which was a customs union arrangement. What we're talking about here is very, very different, and you know that, and it's not right to mislead.
Well, we should be staying in it anyway. I mean, the question we started with was, should we be walking away? And the answer is no, the consequences are potentially disastrous. But the question is, what are the options? We have the Prime Minister's proposals, the Chequers deal. I mean, one of her closest allies today, Mike Penning, said it's as dead as a dodo, and she was reflecting the view in her own party. It hasn't been killed by the European Union, though they're hostile to it. It's been killed at home. So her plan isn't going anywhere. We're then faced with the possibility, which is now looming very large, of what you might call a blindfold Brexit, where they sign off on something to get past the 29th of March, but all the important issues that affect people's jobs, which are the trading arrangements, they're all due to be sorted out later. The can is kicked down the road and there's nothing resolved. I mean, I take the view that the position has changed enormously since the referendum took place. A lot of people are changing their views about it when they see the options available. So the only practical option, it seems to me, to get us out of the mess that we're in, and we are in a mess, is to refer this back to you, the public, and say, do you accept... Do you accept what the government's got, whatever it turns out to be, or should we stay within the European Union, albeit reformed?
OK, there are a lot of hands up, and I will come to you, as many of you as I can. Let's just go around the rest of the panel and get the stall set out, so to speak. Camilla Tominey.
Well, I did the interview with Sir Mike Penning today in The Telegraph, and when he says that Chequers is as dead as a dodo, he's right, because Tory MPs don't want it, Brexit and Remain. Labour have said they don't want to vote for it. The EU has now rejected it. So Chequers is dead and a new plan needs to be found. That doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be leaving without a deal. I think most pragmatic Brexiteers and Remainers want a deal. But equally, when you said, Barry, that no deal would represent a complete failure of the EU's, of the government's negotiating strategy, it would also represent a complete failure of the EU's negotiating strategy. Because a a deal between... If a deal is so important to Britain, then by its very nature and consequence, it must be very, very important to the EU as well. This is a mutually beneficial setup that we have here, that if we want it to continue, we need a deal together. And this rhetoric from Tusk, which I think his words were something like, this won't work for us, a deal won't work for us. All right then, Mr Tusk, then us handing over nearly 40 billion quid won't work for us either.
Okay. So, did you think Chequers was quite a good suggestion, the Chequers proposals?
I thought Lancaster House, what she laid out there, which was far more along the lines of Canada, and the deal that Canada has struck with the EU, was much more preferable to more people. I think that Chequers concedes too much. I think if you're talking about a common rule book, what you're really talking about is an EU rule book, and the EU dictating the rules on things like artificial intelligence, which is something that the British are really good at and can lead the way with. Also, I don't subscribe to Project Fear. I subscribe to a much more optimistic view of life without being shackled to the EU. And you know, these predictions, the predictions of Project Fear, you know, all of this jumping off a cliff, this, that and the other. Project Fear has been proved to be wrong. We're not falling off cliffs. Everyone's carrying on with their lives. Of course, it would be preferable to have a deal, but it won't be the end of the world. You know, we've actually lived through bigger traumas and thrived afterwards.
OK. Nazir Afzal.
Well, we haven't left the EU yet, so Project Fear...
One at a time,
Project Fear is Project Reality now. So when you've got Land Rover, when you've got people saying we're going to have 3-day weeks, when you're talking about, I think it's BMW, going to close throughout all of April, it's becoming very real to us. And that, to my mind, is the reason why we need to look at where we've got to. 18 months ago, I mean, I'll admit it, I voted to Remain 2 years ago, so did my daughter. But two of my sons weren't old enough to vote. Their friends, Courtney, Daniel, they weren't ready to vote. Today, they are old enough to vote. They should be given, and this is where I agree with Vince said, they should be given the opportunity to vote on what we are given by the negotiation or to remain in the EU. They are the generation that are going to be most impacted by the decisions that we are taking as adults. And we are literally ignoring what they have to say. And I think there's a really important point to say about democracy. Somebody said to me, oh, you can't have a second vote. Well, let me make this clear. Democracy, having a democratic vote, does not reduce democracy. On the contrary, giving people the opportunity to make a judgment, because the politicians clearly can't. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be a politician. Let me make this very clear to you, that trust in politicians has gone down to zero.
So when are you going to have this vote? We've had this impasse today. When would you have this vote?
Well, the lawyers, and I'm a lawyer myself, but I'm not a constitutional lawyer, tells us that we can actually seek an extension of the Article 50 window. That gives us the time to have a referendum, ask the people...
No, hang on. Do you want no, wait a minute. Do you want a referendum now before any deal has been done? Or are you suggesting that some deal will be done and then you have a referendum?
We have to have a deal, apparently, according to Donald Tusk, by November. There'll be proposals put forward in October. And then whatever comes out of November, December, that's something we can put to you, the public of Dewsbury. You'll be the most impacted by this. It's important to have and hear what you have to say.
When would you like the third vote? When we don't leave again?
Right, I'm now going to come to what you call the people of Dewsbury, which is our question time order. Just before I do, Chris Skidmore, extending the deadline, is that absolutely ruled out in your mind, or do you think it would be possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we've just heard this whole idea of a second referendum and a people's vote is simply to tell people, well, you know, you voted the wrong way the first time 2 years ago, so therefore let's try and have a referendum and a never-ending situation until we get a so-called right result.
As you know, it's been reported that Cabinet have discussed the possibility of extending the deadline for a decision. Is that true?
No, I'm not aware. I mean, I don't sit in Cabinet, but in
people
terms of...
talk to you, you're the head of the policy department of the Tory party.
It was put into legislation. You know, the whole point around the whole Gina Miller legal case and then having the Article 50 bill means that Parliament voted to legislate the 29th of March into law.
All right, let's broaden this out now. The woman there on the right to you.